Welcome to Count Me In. I'm your host, Adam Larson, and today we have an enlightening episode for you. Joining us is seasoned executive coach and mentor, Jeremy Earnshaw. Jeremy brings a rich background as a CFO and now dedicates his expertise to helping individuals and organizations achieve their full potential. We'll be discussing the ongoing nature of coaching, the importance of genuine organizational change, and how effective leadership fosters self-awareness and accountability. Jeremy will share his journey from training recruits in Europe to creating his own successful coaching practice. We'll explore the critical role of aligning coaching with strategic goals and how it can transform both individuals and teams. This episode is packed with valuable insights, so let's dive right in. Well, Jeremy, I'm just really excited to have you on the podcast, and thank you so much for coming on. And today we're going to be talking a lot about coaching, especially coaching the C-level group. And there's a lot of things we can cover around coaching, but first I want to start, what was your journey to becoming a coach, especially a coach for C-level folks?
Quite a long one, and thanks for having me on the podcast, Adam. It takes me back to 1991, actually, when I delivered some training, I suppose you would call it then, to quite a lot of our new recruits in Europe. And it was quite an extensive period. We did it for 2 to 3 weeks. Really enjoyed it, parked it in the memory bank, went off and did 6 major CFO roles in various kinds of organizations. And what really triggered it back was going on one of these C-suite management strategy away days around 10 years ago. And it was one of those events which just sticks in your memory as being not delivering anything that we're trying to do. We're not delivering individual coaching. We're not making the team better. And it just prompted me again to think there is a better way of continuous learning than some of the interventions that we've been doing in the past. So I said to myself, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do it better. I've always enjoyed doing it on an informal basis, being a coach and a mentor. And I took myself back off to university, went to 2 different universities, gained a master's degree here in the UK, set up my own practice at the same time, and became a full-time coach and a mentor. Really, really engaged in developing individuals, developing teams, and actually developing the systems within which they operate in organizations as well. So quite a long journey, Adam, but triggered by those events and recognizing that I use a phrase that there's this perception in corporate organization world where there is a perception of perfection all the time, that people hire new recruits, you put people into new roles and expect people to be at that 100 out of 100 level. And nobody is. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get people from 6, 7, 8 out of 10 to 10 out of 10 and try to help them on the way. So it's been quite a long journey, Adam, but I'm really pleased that I've got there in the end and really enjoying it.
For sure. Yeah, I remember one job I started at, and my first day they said, read the website. And I sat there kind of like clicking all the links, and like after about an hour, I'm like, what do you want me to do next? And I feel like there's always a big gap a lot of times when you come in or you come into new roles, especially like even somebody going from non-management to management, they're okay. Now you have people under you. You're like, what am I supposed to do now?
You raise exactly the point that isn't thought about enough. Lots of, I think, individuals and lots of organizations, they think about what I call the gains of either moving role, moving sector, moving organization, and they think about the great new title, the fact that they've got a team of people around them. They haven't necessarily thought about all the extra pains involved in those roles. So having to make new relationships with your peer group, potentially, as you said, Adam, having a number of people working with you, as opposed to maybe just being more of an individual, having to create new relationships with maybe external stakeholders. You might be in a sector for the first time. You might be in a boardroom or a C-suite room for the first time. You might have external investors, external bankers or lenders for the first time. And yet we're too busy sometimes in corporate world patting ourselves on the back and giving ourselves a round of applause for bringing in a great new person. And they may be great, but they're moving into another level. That ladder has just gone up. And yet I just think coaching and mentoring can really help people cement their place in that particular area. And I'm sure you may have heard this statistic as well, Adam. I think it's something like between 50 and 70% of people going into C-suite boardroom roles are not in post after 18 months for a whole variety of reasons. There's lots and lots of stats from Harvard Business School, from executive search reviews and surveys. It's a real risk. So for me, coaching and mentoring is de-risking that as well as doing all the positives as well.
Yeah, that's huge. You know, when you hear about coaching and mentoring, some people are very open to it, others aren't. What's some of the resistance that you get when you're trying to say, hey, this is really important, and how do you kind of overcome that?
You're right. And that's a resistance that I think we still face. And I
Yeah.
think we're to blame to a certain extent in our industry as well. And I'll give you my response to the industry and then go back to the question about maybe the individual challenges that we get.
Yeah.
As an industry, it's relatively new. So really only from the early 90s have we been thinking coaching and mentoring. And in the last 30 odd years, it's been largely unregulated as well. So I don't think the sector, the industry, has done itself any favors by not regulating itself properly. And even now, despite the fact that there are professional accreditation organizations, it is almost as if you change your LinkedIn banner, you can become a coach and a mentor. It's not quite as easy as that. And some of the more sensible things to think about are, what about the code of ethics that you sign up to? So I'm a member, for example, of the European Mentoring and Coaching Council, and I subscribe to a global code of ethics. So the more regulation that we can have from a relatively low base point, the better. Coming back to some of the individual responses, we get perhaps challenged that it's a bit fluffy. It's a nice. It's a bit one of those things you do in a friendly organization, in a social enterprise, and everybody pats everybody else on the back. And I think there's that challenge, which is coming from a leadership style, which is more command and control and show and tell of 30 to 40 years ago when I started. So I think what is very much now a influencing and a distributed leadership model. So the challenge I think that we've got as coaches and mentors, and this is why I did the work that I did academically, is to try and at least have some relationship between the objectives of the organization and what you're trying to do for the individual and the organization and the team as well, and actually have a direct link between what you're trying to achieve. And some of the challenges, and I still have people come to me as potential clients and say, I'm interested in doing either some one-to-group or one-to-one coaching. And you ask the question, you pose the question, what do you want to achieve? And it's as if it's not been thought about. And I think that's part of the challenge as well, to, as you would with any other kind of project, any other intervention, work out what you're trying to deliver in the first instance. And make sure your program of coaching and mentoring is absolutely bespoke what the organization and the individual and the teams want to achieve. And I think that can dispel some of that, well, we're not quite sure what it is, therefore we're not quite sure what we want out of it. I think that's the challenge to get across. And if you do it properly, and if you listen to the client, it can be done really, really well and have really tangible results.
I can really see that resistance that you were describing, because I'm sure when some people hear coaching or mentoring, they think, I have to go to like a Tony Robbins conference and I have to listen to him yelling at me for an hour, and then I'm going to feel really inspired and I'm going to do great things. But what you're describing is something more specific, something more targeted, and something that really kind of gets to the heart of what somebody's dealing with, like and taking it at an organizational level, as opposed to individuals going and doing it on their own and finding random people, but as an organization, putting it towards your goals to really raise up the people who you're with. And to me, that sounds like a much better model than what we a lot of times think about when we think about those corporate coaches.
Yeah. And I think you're absolutely right. Some of the, albeit valuable, learning and development interventions are aimed perhaps quite generically. You and I have probably all been on courses in the past where you sit in a room maybe with 15 or 20 people. You can guarantee that 5 people are listening. You can guarantee that 5 people talk more than anybody else. And then there's the group of 10 in the middle who are not quite sure whether they're getting anything out of this at all. And I just think, like anything else, coaching and mentoring, let's take coaching, and there's a difference as well.
Yeah.
Coaching is usually largely targeted towards helping an individual or a team with a specific issue and a real reason for change. Mentoring is perhaps more about the growth and the maturity of the individual to enable them to grow into their role, into their sector, into their organization. I think it really helps in mentoring if you've gone a mile in their shoes as well.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah,
my particular brand of coaching is all aimed at being a combination of academic and real lived experiences. If I was to turn around, I've got a lot of scars on my back, as many coaches and mentors will have as well.
Yeah.
And I think whoever you select as your coach, having somebody who's sat round that boardroom table and seen a dysfunctional organization at work, it really, really helps. And having that link, like you would have with a traditional KPI, you measure your KPIs, you work out whether you're achieving what you want to achieve because you've got some reference points. And then hopefully you've got some challenges and actions to see whether you're going to achieve your objectives in the future. It's the same with coaching and mentoring. What are you trying to achieve? Is it the growth of a team? Because we all know that we might have some fantastically talented individuals who might not be brilliant team players. So how do you do that? How do you get that team to work? And then there's the team of teams. So you've got your marketing, your sales team, your finance team, your people team. You've got a team of teams, all again trying to get to the same objective, which is to grow the company, achieve some financial results, achieve whatever you might want to be doing with sustainable development goals, for example. So just working out and having that bespoke engagement, which determines what you're trying to achieve, can be so valuable. And coaches and mentors should be doing that.
So there's a lot I want to unpack there, but I think we should take a quick step back real quick and just, can you define what a coach is and what a mentor is and maybe the difference? Because people might be assuming that they're the same thing, and I know they're not the same thing, but let's maybe put a definition out there so people can kind of understand what we've been discussing.
Yeah. Well, let's think about what a really good coach needs to have. They need to be compassionate. They need to understand the individual that they're coaching. They need to be curious. They have to have that curiosity to, as you say, to unpack what's in the backpack of the individual or the team that you're coaching. What's in there that you need to try and get out without going round the back and opening up yourself. You need to get that individual or team to unpack that backpack themselves. And you need to be courageous by asking the questions that maybe haven't been asked before. What isn't working? Why is it not working? And you need to be a good listener, and you need to be a good questioner as well to be a coach. Mostly, it's aimed at an individual or a team struggling, let's say struggling positively. They want to change something, and they're coming to you for coaching to try and get you as a coach to try and help them make their own decisions. So there's what's the issue? Why have we got the issue? But the what, the how, you really want the coachee to be doing that themselves. This is not a show and tell exercise. I think with a mentor, you're working with more experience as a mentor, probably having worked in the kind of organization, in the kind of environment, and you are bringing more and more to the growth of that individual and the maturity of that individual or team. You have, as I mentioned before, you probably walked quite a few miles in their shoes, and you might be in that position of saying, have you thought about it a different way? But you're still really trying to get the coachee or the mentee to take responsibility for their own actions. Another critical thing that is the umbrella across all of that is coaching and mentoring should be positive. It shouldn't be seen as a substitute for remedial action in an organization. If people come to me and think, I've got a problem, can we solve it because this lady's on their way out? That's not for me, and it's not for any other coach either.
No, I appreciate that. And it sounds like people who are coaches can be mentors, but not every coach can be a mentor, and not every mentor can be a coach.
I think that's a really good description. I'd really call mentoring coaching plus.
Okay. It's like the extra subscription you get.
It is, yeah.
Yeah. So going back to what we were saying before, we kind of outlined that definition. When you're looking at it from an organizational perspective, saying, hey, my team needs something to help out, like not every boss can be a coach or a mentor, and sometimes you need to bring outside help. How can an organization look at it and say, hey, what are signs that my team needs some coaching or mentoring? Maybe we can start there. What are some signs? And then how do we demonstrate that this is going to benefit, and can we measure that? So that's like 3 questions all in one, but we can try to go through those.
I think some of the obvious signs are you have this dysfunctional team or a dysfunctional individual or a dysfunctional team of teams. And the signs of that, all your listeners will have seen before, whichever discipline that they're in. You've got people who aren't engaged. You've got people who have become, I'll give you a phrase that I use sometimes, is that when people do school, they further their education, there's a thirst for knowledge and learning.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden it stops. So instead of being the sponge, you become the rock. And I think the signs of needing coaching and mentoring are people have taken this massive step back and become a rock. They're not interested in doing things differently. They're interested, through potentially no fault of their own, doing the same as you did before. So I think the signs of that are you've got a disconnect between the objectives of the organization and the outputs. One of the most obvious ones that organizations see, I think, are the fact that if they do performance reviews on a regular basis, you might have a series of performance reviews, which if you did the bell curve, everyone's in that satisfactory, exceeding expectations line. You then look at the actual outputs in KPIs against the targets, and the bell curve is below the median. And there's a disconnect there. So I think that's another way. Everyone thinks we're doing well, but actually the results say that we're not. So there's a disconnect there. So I think that's a real obvious sign of needing to do coaching and mentoring. And remind me what the second part of the question was, Adam.
So now that we've outlined, how to identify, hey, my team could use some help, how does one go about saying, hey, senior leadership, or hey, board, this is what my team needs, and this is how I can justify that cost? Because obviously there's a cost involved.
There is. And that's another challenge that you're faced. I think you raised a good point in your introduction to this question as well, about it being independent.
Yeah.
I'm a huge fan of it all being independent, because there's that conflict of interest at whatever level with your line manager, even if it's a line manager in another area or another discipline, there's a connection there, and it's not independent, and it might not be confidential either. So I think doing that, so to gain the coaching, I think it has to come from the top. I think segments of coaching, unless it's a segment of coaching within an overall framework of an organization that really, really wants, let's call it what I call a coaching foundation factor, trying to do it on its own as a discrete piece of work, you're a function of the system that's around you. If your team isn't working, it's probably got quite a lot to do with the fact that the system, the organization, is quite dysfunctional as well. How do we do that? I think it comes from the top. I think it stems from a leadership team that is committed to distributed leadership, coaching foundation factor that cascades down through the organization. I think critical one is that you're allowed to ask for help. So there's an element of psychological safety within there as well, and accepting the fact that you're not the 10 out of 10. So I think a really critical thing is being able to say expressing a weakness is not the same as being weak. And I think it's important to have that structure whereby also everybody can be touched by coaching as well. So it's not just aimed at the elite. So is it, because if you're aiming coaching at the top 15 people in the organization, I think you have to ask, what does number 16 think? What does number 17 think? So I think at whatever level, coaching and mentoring can add value to the behaviors of people within an organization as well. And everybody can demonstrate, this is what I found in my research, Everybody can be a leader if they demonstrate the values and the behaviors of the organization. But it stems from the top, Adam.
I like that approach because like you said, let's say I'm only gonna provide coaching for the first 15 people. What about that 16th person, 17th person? They're probably not too far away from the 15th person. How do you you have to make sure it's equitable and make sure you're going to help the whole organization.
Absolutely. And you're what you're really wanting to happen is that your coachees become the biggest supporters of further coaching and mentoring. So they become maybe internal coaches or internal mentors, and you get that cascading function down. Otherwise, as you quite rightly say, Adam, you end up with disenfranchised colleagues.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like, too, you have to kind of overcome certain mindsets. Obviously, if people have preconceived notions, you have to break those down. And also, there's a certain level of humility, accepting, hey, I can improve. And I think that sometimes when we're, especially in the corporate world and especially in fast-paced environments, you have to have this, like, I'm going to do everything and nothing can stop me kind of feel. And that can sometimes be to your detriment.
I absolutely agree. We're in violent agreement, I think, as they say over here in the UK. You're absolutely right. At some point, even a high-performing individual will reach the limit of what they can do.
Yeah.
And in getting there, they may have created, and finance people in particular, such as me, will recognize this. That single point of failure is something that you do not want to have in any kind of finance structure. And it can happen in any discipline as well. So the challenge is making sure that that team is seen to be critical in the output. And we don't have the situation where we're so focused upon just individual targets, because ultimately it's bad for the organization. So yeah, the challenge, you mentioned cost as well before, that there needs to be that return, there needs to be that investment and delivery, and you need to be able to understand how we're going to measure it as well.
Yeah. So let's dig into that. How can one measure the return of this coaching programs that they would implement in an organization?
What I found in researching this whole area was that there was no consensus. And the reason I took upon the challenge of trying to understand it a bit further was because whether it had been done by academics or practitioners, there was no consensus. And I thought it was a rich subject to try and understand. So I did some research, and it came down to two distinct areas. And there won't be any surprises in this, that there was no magic bullets in there really, but it set out and it gave me exactly what I wanted to do in researching it from senior leaders in an organization. Area number one, relatively internal. So individual KPIs. How can you see the increase in performance from an individual? Number two, what are we challenging ourselves with in terms of an organization improving performance? What are we hoping to achieve? Number three, customer service. And all of those three still have the challenge about, is it exclusively as a result of coaching and mentoring? And I think I have to say, the answer is probably no. But you can track and you can set your objectives between the strategic objectives of the organization and have a coaching program so they're aimed at delivering improvements in each of those areas. Some of the more clear examples would be net promoter scores. You would have improvement in customer service metrics. You would have improvements in retentions. You would have less resignations within the organization. So there are the metrics there. But I think it's important, again, in any engagement to work out, I have a little model called PASS, Progress Against Strategic Success Measures. Work out what you're trying to achieve. For the internal measures, my research also demonstrated that quite a lot of people in the leadership positions wanted to have an impact beyond the organization as well. And some of them crossed a boundary. So these leaders wanted a distributed leadership structure. They wanted to be able to delegate. They wanted to go from a command and control to an influencing leadership model. They wanted a coaching foundation factor. They wanted to create culture that could be measured by, for example, colleague surveys. The very extreme was, why am I here? Am I here to promote gender equality? Am I here to save the planet? Am I here to have equitable homes for everybody? So this was a little bit of a surprise in that people associated themselves with coaching and mentoring for the greater good. Gave me 6 areas, and working with the leaders at the start of a coaching program to work out on a fairly regular basis whether we were seeing any improvements in the metrics that were closest to those areas of improvement that they wanted to make, and setting it out right at the start. And that was a real takeaway. Coaching programs for coaching's sake, people coming to you and saying, I've heard about coaching and mentoring, let's do it because it sounds good. Well, actually, no, what you really want to do with everything else, set out the goals, set out the objectives, and be ready for the challenge from the finance people in particular that says, show me the money, show me the results. It's still a challenge, but like everything else, you can actually set out what you're trying to achieve.
I think that's a much better approach, because a lot of times you go to leadership programs and you throw your team into that program, they read a book, they do a bunch of things, but you can never really measure it. And with any organization, you have to set out goals, you have to set, make sure they're measurable. There's always make sure they're measurable, SMART goals, make sure they're measurable, make sure you can attain, like all that. I can't remember what SMART stands for right now, but if you have all those things in place, you can easily see if this is, if your goal has been attained. And so taking coaching out of the ethereal, fluffy, weak, remedial thing that people think it is and saying, no, this is an actual business goal that we can attain it. It kind of breaks down all those myths that people have about it.
It absolutely does. And I think it's fine to have the SMART metrics. It's fine to do that. But what you're really trying to do as well is you're trying to mature the level of thinking in a coaching and mentoring. It's not just about the results. You're trying to get the coachees and the mentees themselves. You raised a point earlier, which was absolutely right. It actually starts with self-awareness and the desire to do something differently in a positive way. So having people come to you and saying, I want to be coached, they need to have looked in the mirror to begin with, like we all have to do, and say, we're never the finished article, and we want to change positively, and we'd like to do things better than we did yesterday. Can you help us do that? And a coach and a mentor can do that. And it might not be just hitting the metrics, because we all know that hitting some metrics in year 1 might have been achieved to the detriment of year 2 and year 3. In finance, we all know that can happen. You can have a stellar performance year, but what about the costs of that for the long-term value of the organization? So it starts with the coachee and the mentee accepting element of self-awareness. And as a coach and a mentor as well, that was a big challenge for anybody in studying coaching and mentoring, to actually recognize that that's where we need to start as well to be able to do this properly.
Well, is it with any true thing that helps you grow, it has to be cyclical. You have to come back around to it. And if you're in an organization and you have those first people maybe that were part of the program, they're going to be your proponents to say, hey, get in this program because this is the things that help. And you keep it going within an organization. Is that the same with coaching? It seems like that would be the to keep the wheels turning, because otherwise you'll do it one time and then 5 years later you're like, didn't we have a coaching program a few years ago?
Yeah. And I unfortunately do see that with individuals as well, is that they see it as a start and a finish line, and it's not.
Yeah.
And there might well be a shelf life to individual coaches and mentors where you think, and I have an arrangement with everybody, as I'm sure lots of other coaches do as well, which says, do you know what, after a period of time, let's review the situation. And I have a no-fault engagement. So if people just say, I think I've just reached the end of the road, I want to try something else, that's great. And my biggest positives as a coach have been people I coached 6-7 years ago who are still in contact with me, who've gone on to fantastic careers because they're spreading the message with their own people that coaching and mentoring can really work. And what was the real success of those people? They did it all themselves.
Yeah.
They took the decisions. They are proponents of coaching and mentoring, and they recognize that they wanted to do the changing themselves. But as a discrete element, and somebody like one of the authors I read a lot is someone called Professor David Clutterbuck, and I've got plenty of books around me in my office here. And he would say, you absolutely need to think about the system, the organization in which people operate, because you might be banging your head against a brick wall if you just focus on one team or one individual. It's the whole team, it's the whole organizational system that may need to be influenced as well.
Well, and I think that just shows how, systematically we have to make changes. You can't just change a couple people here and there and just leave all policies the same, leave everything we've been doing the same. You actually have to, everybody has to kind of buy into it. And so it starts with the individual. So you have to kind of start at an individual level and then make sure that it reaches everyone.
Yeah. And we need to promote the successes. You quite rightly say that it really does start at the top. It can't be seen to be remedial. And going back to one of your very first questions, what was one of the triggers to say, I think we can really, really promote coaching and mentoring within any organization was it was attending one of those 2-day away sessions where you all go away to in your case, equivalent of a national park. You do some karaoke in the evening, you spend a little bit of time together, spend 2 days, then you come back and everything's going to be all right. And you've achieved absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
And so that kind of targeted intervention, probably at a very elitist level as well, at the senior people, unless it's cascaded down, it really just needs to be a waterfall. And it starts with that leadership style, I think, that promotes self-awareness, positive change, and accountability and responsibility for people to do it better tomorrow.
I think that's great. And Jeremy, this has been a wonderful conversation. I'm sure we could keep talking about coaching. I'm sure you could talk about it for hours, but I really appreciate you coming on, sharing all your knowledge and just your connections with our audience. And I encourage everybody to connect with Jeremy online and let's continue the conversation. So thanks so much, Jeremy.
Adam, a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for the invitation.
This has been Count Me In, IMA's podcast, providing you with the latest perspectives of thought leaders from the accounting and finance profession. If you like what you heard and you'd like to be counted in for more relevant accounting and finance education, visit IMA's website at www.imanet.org.